In 1978, workers at an electric company accidentally discovered a large stone relief in front of a multi-stage temple under the streets of Mexico City. The Aztecs, or known to themselves as the Mexica or Huītzilōpōchtli, are Nahua and have multiple lunar deities. The main lunar goddess depicted on the stone that we will be talking about is named Coyolxāuhqui, meaning something close to woman painted or adorned with copper bells, or bells on her face, and is immortalized in a humiliating form on the monolith. Visitors to Mexico City, as it was built directly on top of Tenochtitlan, can still feel the intimidation factor from the stone at the base of Templo Mayor once lay while waiting in line to get to the National Museum. However, the monolith was originally placed in its position to show the power of the Mixtec Empire and how they used human life from other places. It also made clear what they found most important. I'm Renee Whitehouse, thank you for joining me, and you're listening to Detours in Archaeology. This major sculpture depicts the aftermath of Coyolxāuhqui's brother's birth in front of the Huītzilōpōchtli side of the Templo Mayor main temple, or in Nahuatl, Huītzilōpōchtli, in the city of Tenochtitlan. According to tradition, the Templo Mayor was erected on the exact spot where Atlan pilgrims discovered the sacred cactus growing on a stone, on which an eagle sat with his wings open to the sun, eating a serpent. This was also the promise of a home, which was immortalized on the Mexican flag. Despite its simple construction with mud and wood, this initial monument dedicated to Huītzilōpōchtli represented the start of what would later become one of the most famous ceremonial buildings of its time. Through the years, the rulers of Mexico Tenochtitlan would build a new construction stage on that pyramid, making it taller and wider. And although the works generally only consisted of attaching slopes and renewing stairs, the power of the ruler and their veneration of the god, or gods in this case, caused the pyramids to keep growing larger and larger, eventually growing to 90 feet tall and was fully covered in stucco. Other gods were also honored by the Nahua for preserving harmony, balancing nature's powers, and supporting plant growth for human sustenance. The Templo Mayor, therefore, had twin temples devoted to Tlaloc and Huītzilōpōchtli. The former Tlaloc was the deity connected with water, rain, and agricultural productivity, and the latter was the god of the sun, warfare, sacrifice, and was the patron god of Tenochtitlan, whose name translates to left-handed hummingbird, or hummingbird on the left, or hummingbird of the south, on the basis that Mexica cosmology associated the south with the left-hand side of the body. Together, they represent the Mexica notion of the Mexica notion of Actlachinoli, or scorched water, which represented warfare and the primary way of attaining power and wealth in the Mexica culture at the time. Humans were sacrificed atop this temple, and their remains were dismembered and thrown down the stairs to the base, like that in the tale of Huītzilōpōchtli's birth and Cotepec, meaning Snake Mountain. The stone, carved in circa 1473 CE during the reign of Ayakut, is a high-relief monolith carved on a single stone 3.4 meters, almost 11 feet in diameter. Due to her naked depiction, at least half of my 15-person archaeological study abroad class, including me, started calling her Tits McGee. Definitely not the nicest thing. We were being pretty dumb and culturally insensitive. However, in making fun of Coyolxāuhqui, we were unknowingly taking part in the centuries-old tradition, because for the Mexica, nakedness was considered a form of humiliation and defeat. This mythology is amazing. There are so many various versions of this story. So I'll share the first one that I heard back in 2014 from my professor, and then some variations. Just know that while researching, almost everything I read differed in one way or another. So, long, very mixed up story short, Coyolxāuhqui's mother was the priestess Coatlicue, or skirt of serpents, also known as Tetioinen, or mother of deities, as the goddess of life, death, rebirth, and fertility. One day, when Coyolxāuhqui was sweeping in a temple, a ball of feathers just fluttered down from the heavens and landed on her breast. This caused her to become pregnant, and her belly swelled. She later returned home to her daughter, Coyolxāuhqui, and 400 sons, the Huītzilōpōchtli, the 400 southern stars. And Coyolxāuhqui saw her mother's condition and became enraged, as her mother had dishonored her entire family by getting pregnant. Coyolxāuhqui pulled her brothers aside, and they all plotted together to murder her mother. Unfortunately, she must not have pulled them far enough to the side, because Coyolxāuhqui overheard everything. But she didn't panic long, because she had baby Huītzilōpōchtli growing in her uterus, who told her that she shouldn't worry, he would protect her. That night, the 400 brothers, dressed in their warrior garb, followed Coyolxāuhqui to kill the mother in her sleep. Because the group had been found out, both Coyolxāuhqui and Huītzilōpōchtli were prepared for the attack. In an instant, Huītzilōpōchtli burst out of his mother's body, fully grown, armored, and armed, and started cutting down all of his brothers without fully killing them, before turning his special axe towards his sister. With no chance of victory, Coyolxāuhqui and her brothers were led to the top of the nearby sacred snake mountain, Cotepec, and one by one, Huītzilōpōchtli chopped off each one of the Huītzilōpōchtli's heads and threw them up into the sky, where they lived up to their name as being the 400 southern stars. Lastly, Huītzilōpōchtli ripped his sister Coyolxāuhqui apart by the limbs before decapitating her, and tossing her head into the sky to become the moon, and rolled her body off the side of the mountain as a warning to all future threats. In the most drastic departure from the previous version of this mythical duel, Coyolxāuhqui is actually Huītzilōpōchtli's mother. One day, she upset her son when she insisted on staying at Cotepec and not following Huītzilōpōchtli's plan to resettle at a new site, the future Tenochtitlan. The god of war got his way by decapitating her and eating the heart of his mother Coyolxāuhqui, after which he led the Mexica to their new home. This version didn't match the other dismemberment or the monolith, so there is a possibility that it's a version that's from before the monolith was ever carved, and even came from the original Mixtec group that left the Toltec region in Tulum. Smaller changes between versions appear in details that don't change the whole story, such as why Coyolxāuhqui was sweeping, if she was just doing a job, fulfilling some penance, or if, as the maternal earth deity, she was sweeping her own shrine. In what she did with the feathers, because the first version discussed while performing her duties as a cleaner at the shrine on the top of the sacred mountain, a ball of feathers suddenly descended from the heavens. Adjustments appear when Coyolxāuhqui grabbed the ball, tucked it into her belt, and it miraculously impregnated her, or when a ball of specifically hummingbird feathers fell from the sky, she snatched them up, placed them at her waist, and she became pregnant. Or when a single feather fell from the sky, Coyolxāuhqui picked it up because it was so beautiful and placed it on her breast. When she finished sweeping, she looked for the feather but couldn't find it, and that's when she realized she was pregnant. Sometimes you also have the feathers flying up her skirt, so in mythology, that would definitely get her pregnant. However, in every story, Coyolxāuhqui's offspring are enraged to learn that their mother is pregnant, and Coyolxāuhqui convinces them that their mother had dishonored them all and should die. Don't really know why. Coyolxāuhqui is always said to be very scared and sad, but Huītzilōpōchtli, who is growing in her womb, always tells her not to fear because he would protect her, and she would feel comforted and calmed. In several versions, while Coyolxāuhqui and 399 of her brothers planned revenge, one of them, either left unnamed or named Coyolxāuhqui, went looking for his mother and Huītzilōpōchtli to tell them their siblings were making plans to kill them and would be on their way soon. In these versions, Coyolxāuhqui is a named god, as one of the northern stars, as part of the Senson Mixtec, the 400 Mixtec, who had a completely different parentage than the brother in this story. In the stories in which they are given advance notice, the pregnant Coyolxāuhqui could miraculously give birth to a fully grown and armed Huītzilōpōchtli, who sprang from her womb wielding his shield of eagle feathers, Taleoli, and his turquoise darts and his blue dart thrower, Sinatlat. In one version, Huītzilōpōchtli had enough preparation time to paint his arms and legs blue, draw diagonal stripes on his face, put on a crown of hummingbird feathers, and wear a feathered sandal on his right foot. However, for this character, the right foot doesn't really make sense because, as mentioned earlier, the name Huītzilōpōchtli means hummingbird to the left, which arose from the circumstance in this story that the god wore feathers of the hummingbird, or colibri, on his left leg. From this, it has been inferred that he was a hummingbird token. In other versions, the god sprung from his mother's severed neck before two giant snakeheads grew to replace it after Coyolxāuhqui had decapitated her. This shows up in the Coyolxāuhqui statue as well. But even though he had other weapons, it was with his most formidable weapon, Huītzilōpōchtli, or turquoise snake or fire serpent, which was a ray of the sun that the warrior god could use to swiftly butcher his unruly siblings. At least he used it to wound his sister, cutting off her head, and then threw it into the sky wherein it became the moon. While some variations say that Huītzilōpōchtli chopped up Coyolxāuhqui into several large chunks, which he lobbed off the mountainside, just like on the monolith, others say that after the decapitation, he rolled the full body or threw the body down, which either would have caused the body to fall apart on the way down or broke apart when it reached the foot of the mountain. In one story recorded by Sahagún in 1569, Huītzilōpōchtli throws his sister's body over the side of Coatepec. Quote, "He pierced Coyolxāuhqui and then quickly struck off her head. It stopped there at the edge of Coatepec, and her body came falling down. It fell, breaking into pieces. In various places, her arms, her legs, her body, each fell." Unquote. And the last major change, even though the ending point would end up being the same, has to do with the Star Brothers. In at least one of the versions in which one of the brothers helped Huītzilōpōchtli, he chased the other 399 brothers to the foot of the mountain after killing their sister. Many begged for forgiveness, but only a few escaped his ire and survived by heading south, where they became the stars, rather than being deadheads in the sky like their sister. Otherwise, either 399 or the full 400 brothers would have been decapitated at Coatepec, where their heads were also tossed into the sky. In a little bit of a twist, some authors have written that Huītzilōpōchtli tossed Coyolxāuhqui's head into the sky where it became the moon, and that her scattered brothers became the southern star deities, so that his mother would be comforted in seeing her daughter in the sky every night. This gruesome myth focusing on sibling rivalry may have symbolized the daily victory of the sun, one of Huītzilōpōchtli's associations, over the moon and stars. However, some scholars have argued that Coyolxāuhqui should actually be associated with the Milky Way rather than being a direct lunar goddess. This could be the reason that there is another moon goddess, Metzli, whose name means moon. It's also possible that they were both supposed to be the same deity, as well as Huītzilōpōchtli and the male moon god Techitecatl, because they all had the same domain encompassing the moon, the night, and sometimes farmers. But no matter how many sources we use, we can't really be sure of the original because the oldest versions were not written down until the 16th century in the codices, as far as we know. Looking at the image analysis of the monolith, with chemical analysis, we can look at the original cylinder and the vibrant colors to see how much it would stand apart from its surroundings. In the artwork, Coyolxāuhqui is shown with bright yellow skin, decapitated, dismembered, and surrounded by deep red blood. Standing out from the red-blooded background, sandals, accessories, and certain facial features are the bright blues of her headdress, the rope knots, and various other details in the carving. Along with the white accessory details, she is wearing a white skull on her belt, there's white paint on her face, and there are white dots on her headdress. Also, her white bones emerge from the scalloped edges of her dismembered body parts. Getting more specific, she is wearing a ritual blue eagle down feathered headdress, blue earrings for the Mexica year sign, a special cheek symbol of a bell, as pertains to her name, bracelets, sandals, a serpent loincloth, a skull on a belt of snakes, and her limbs have been tied with the ropes of snakes. But other than that, she's naked. And as I said before, to the Mexica, nudity would have been shameful, and thus it would be another way of breaking down her power and influence. The body has sagging breasts with a wrinkled and sagging stomach, even though her head is shown to be quite young, to symbolize the differences between the ages of the new and full moons. The last influence we see reflected from older cultures like the Olmec and Maya are the monster faces that are on her elbows and knees, reminding onlookers of snakes, skulls, and the earth monster. The rope knots are likely symbols of the double-headed serpent known as Mythological, which were negative omens that could indicate death. And associated with Huītzilōpōchtli as one of his names creates a tie between the siblings. Coyolxāuhqui's joints being restrained by the Mythological is both symbolic of her duty to serve as a warning as well as identifying the importance of rebirth. In the Mixtec religion, snake iconography is said to represent rebirth because of its ability to shed its skin. The Mythologica's two heads may have also represented the earth and the underworld. The snake motif also alludes to the feathered serpent god Huītzilōpōchtli as a symbol of death and resurrection in Mixtec mythology. More broadly, the color green and the serpents represent fertility, while the turquoise used to create the motifs represents fresh growth and water, guaranteeing that land fertility was central to most Mixtec rituals. During these rituals, priests would wear the quetzal bird's feathers on their headdresses, while the underlying snake head's vivid turquoise skin and wide jaws were meant to impress and frighten the observers. The Coyolxāuhqui stone would have served as a cautionary sign to the enemies of Tenochtitlan. According to Mexica history, female deities such as Coyolxāuhqui were the first Mexica enemies to die in war. In this way, Coyolxāuhqui came to represent all conquered cultures. Her violent death was a warning for the fate to all who crossed the Mixtec warriors. As the researcher Richard Townsend notes that the disc represented the defeat of the Mexica's enemies at large because sacrificial victims would have had to cross the stone before walking up the stairs of the temple to the block in front of Huītzilōpōchtli's shrine, where they would have been killed. There's also a large stone head that was also found at Tenochtitlan, which was probably carved during the reign of Huītzilōpōchtli from 1486 to 1502. Coyolxāuhqui is shown decapitated and with closed eyes because she was beheaded by her brother Huītzilōpōchtli. However, this is different than the monolith, and depending on when it was actually carved, it could have been influenced by the ruler's decisions or even influenced post-contact. As her name suggests, and the same as the monolith, the face has bells on her cheeks. She is also wearing the same elaborate ear sign ear flares and a matching nose flare that falls over her lips, and a headdress patterned with feathers near the back and the parallel lines and dots on the base, just like in the monolith. These would have likely have been carved for a more transportable symbol of power of Huītzilōpōchtli when sacrificing the captive enemies of war. Now I'm going to talk a little bit about the role of sacrifice. Blood is extremely important in Mixtec mythology, as it keeps the earth from eating us. Scholars believe that the decapitation and destruction of Coyolxāuhqui is reflected in the pattern of warrior ritual sacrifice, particularly during the feast of Pancatalitzli, Banner Rising. The feast takes place during the 15th month of the Mixtec calendar and is dedicated to Huītzilōpōchtli, and this was all recorded by de Tovar back in 1585. During the ceremony, the hearts of captives were cut out and their bodies were thrown down the temple to the Coyolxāuhqui stone. There, they were decapitated and dismembered, just as Coyolxāuhqui was by Huītzilōpōchtli on top of Cotepec. The heads of these enemies that would be sacrificed at the top of the stairs of a temple pyramid would later be placed on a tzimbochtli, a skull rack. In some other areas in the Mesoamerican world, for example from the Toltec culture and in Chichen Itza, these were only symbolic, being carved out of rock. While there was human sacrifice, it wasn't always necessary, much like Ushaptis in Egypt. And like with the Maya, bloodletting was a common practice in the Mixtec religion, wherein the kings and queens would sacrifice their blood by kings piercing their penises with the stingray spine, and anyone piercing their tongues and running a rope of thorns through the hole. The dripping blood that was caught on cotton strips were burnt as the offering so the smoke goes to heaven. But what is remembered more commonly from both cultural traditions are the heart removals and the decapitations, which were exhibited on the top of pyramids in front of huge crowds. Coyolxāuhqui was and is still seen as the villain of the story, which, from our standpoint, seems pretty obvious. But after reading Unframing the Bad Woman by Alicia Gaspar de Alba, I got a bit angry for Coyolxāuhqui. As there are so many versions, these are all part of a longer and more in-depth story. Gaspar de Alba's analysis is very deep and goes into a lot of extra backstory behind these characters. For a quick example, Coyolxāuhqui and her family served other gods, as evidenced by Coyolxāuhqui sweeping in a temple as a service of penance. For what? We aren't told. For whom? We also don't know. But when she is stated to be an earth goddess, why is she even sweeping her own temple? Not that she couldn't, but then how Huītzilōpōchtli was getting inside his new, unknowing, and non-consensual mother. But Coyolxāuhqui blaming the victim is not ever fair. Which sounds like all of the women in every story involving Zeus, but inevitably started a new religious following and involved building a whole new temple, and really started with a pilgrimage from the Cotepec mountain, which was said to be in Tula, a site in Hidalgo, Mexico. It might not have been too far for the time, being only about a day's walk south to the future site of Tenochtitlan, but we also have to remember they left not knowing where they were going to settle. They just had, as the legend goes, a story, and ended up staying in a swamp where no other culture in Mexico wanted to live. People don't care for being told that they can't follow their religion anymore, or more generally, live how they are used to or want to. We know this from what happened with Akhenaten in Egypt, or any of the times European monarchs switched between the versions of Christianity. Protecting our family and what we know is fair to a certain point. And there's more to all these stories than what we've been told, and we can't pretend that the Spanish conquest and the influence afterwards didn't play into twisting the tales to suit their own ends. Summarized from Gaspar de Alba, the Christian conquerors would have likely approved of a peace-bringing, immaculately conceived son coming into this world and starting a new religion, and therefore anyone against them is evil. Though, to be clear, the myth and the monolith both existed pre-contact. But could this be why the story could have changed so dramatically from one version to another? Was it a way of purging the earlier depictions of the mythological figures in favor of the new Mixtec main deity in support of moving a large group of people from one area to another? I don't know, and we can never really know for sure. So, to avoid diving in far further into a full thesis, I will just say that there's a much more nuanced view of human sacrifice in various cultures around the world, and how the causes and effects are built into a peaceful worldview. In various cultures around the world, the theme of devotion and connection to one's family is deeply intertwined with the concepts of power and the cycle of life, death, and rebirth. It is believed that individuals who are devoted to their families and communities are seen as deserving of power and bestowed upon them by the gods. This is why Coyolxāuhqui and her brothers needed to be punished after trying to kill their mother. This power is not just physical or material, but sometimes also spiritual and cosmic, symbolizing the interconnectedness of all human beings. The act of human sacrifice, often depicted in Mesoamerican art, represents a sacrifice for the greater good of sustaining this cycle of life, death, and rebirth. Through these rituals, the connections between the human and divine realms is reinforced, showcasing a profound understanding of the complexities of existence and the importance of navigating them. In wrapping up this exploration of the story of Coyolxāuhqui, a Mexica goddess of the moon, we are left with a profound sense of awe and wonder at the complexities of this mythology. Through her fragmented representation, we glimpse the intricate layers of symbolism and meaning that define Mexica beliefs. Coyolxāuhqui's story serves as a reminder of the eternal struggle between the sun and the moon, light and darkness, life and death, and the importance of the inevitable cycles of rebirth. She is a powerful symbol of transformation, resilience, and the enduring power of myth to transcend time, and continues to influence artistic representations and cultural narratives to this day. Don't forget to follow the link in the description to follow along with the written version of this podcast and to look at the pictures, check out the works cited for further reading, and some extra asides. Also, what I'm going to start doing is have a little random fact at the end if you sit through all my thank yous. A little bit more news, I started a Patreon. So if you want some extra content on Mondays, I'm just going to put out maybe a little bit more creative stuff. Please head over to my Patreon. It would be really awesome if I could get any support at all. You'll get some extra stuff depending on your level. I really appreciate it. The music comes from Scott Buckley, whose music can be found at scottbuckley.com.au, from inaudio.org, and from Bensound's royalty-free music at bensound.com. Once again, I'm glad you could join me on this captivating journey through the art and symbolism of ancient cultures. If you enjoyed today's episode, and if you'd like to stay up to date on my latest content, make sure to subscribe to my podcast. I love to hear your thoughts and feedback, so please leave a comment or review or just like it. Your support means the world to me and helps me continue sharing these incredible stories. For more fascinating art history insights, please visit my website, and don't forget to follow me on social media for all the latest updates. You'll get to see my articles and also my pieces of art. So stay curious and stay inspired. And until next time, keep taking those detours. The first random interesting fact is going to be about cuttlefish. The cuttlefish is actually colorblind, so it cannot enjoy the beautiful colors that it creates when it changes near instantaneously to blend in with the color and texture of any of their surroundings. Thanks again.